Hey, this is Abel James, and thanks so much for joining us on the show. Have you ever had a concussion? Anyone who's ever had their bell rung knows recovery can be brutal. But with enough time and the right treatment, our bodies also have the remarkable ability to heal. Today, we're going hard in the paint on brain health, electromagnetic fields, and decentralization in tech, food, and finance with our friend Tristan Scott. Tristan is an electrical engineer, health marketing lead at Daylight Computer Company, and author of Bitcoin and Beef. After suffering from debilitating long-term symptoms following multiple concussions sustained as a college athlete, Tristan made a commitment to healing his brain. This led to a deep dive into the world of alternative health, exploring the critical roles our diet, circadian rhythm, and electromagnetic environment play in our health and performance. I met Tristan in Austin last year at Squatch while feasting on delicious beef from our friend Johnny, and from our first conversation, it's clear why Tristan has become a rising voice and leader in the world of alternative health and tech. Tristan's expertise in electrical engineering gives him a unique perspective on the often overlooked impacts of EMFs and how we can reclaim our health and sovereignty in the face of the technological onslaught of the modern world. But before we get to the interview, here's a quick plug. If you'd like to be friends on the socials, you can search for me under Abel James, usually with the handle at Abel James, that's Abel James. I even started a new Instagram account. I finally caved. You can connect with me by searching for at Abel Jams. And if you dig this podcast, I bet you'd also like my newsletter. You can sign up at abeljames.com or on Substack. All right, on to the show with Tristan Scott. You're about to hear easy tips to reduce your exposure to EMFs from a trained engineer, Tristan's vision for decentralized technology to create a more sovereign future, the surprising relationship between Bitcoin and beef, and much more. Let's go hang out with Tristan. Welcome back, folks. Today we're here with Tristan Scott, an electrical engineer, author of Bitcoin and Beef, and co-host of Decentralized Radio, as well as the health marketing lead at Daylight Computer Company. Thanks so much for joining us, Tristan.
Hey, well, thanks for having me. Yeah, it's great to reconnect.
Totally. Yeah, I was so glad to meet you and the folks at Daylight. And that such a cool event in Austin a few months ago as you guys got off the ground. But man, your background is fascinating. You're a brainiac yourself. Let's talk a little bit about how you got into this whole world, especially of alternative health, because you have somewhat of a traditional background.
Yeah. It's been a unique journey, I would say, but so fun. Met so many great people and just have continued to learn and evolved. And it's funny being introduced as like the author of Bitcoin and Beef, because to me that feels almost like a lifetime ago.
Yeah.
Writing that 3 years ago. And that was kind of my starting point in terms of getting out into the public sphere. But everything else was still like 2, 3 years prior. So end of 2017, actually suffered one too many concussions and did everything wrong in the acute recovery phase, and basically had post-concussive symptoms and syndrome, daily headaches for over a year. And that just led me to this self-healing rabbit hole that I knew I had to go down to get better, because I was getting no answers from the centralized healthcare system, seeing neurologists, etc. And I went from being, a very high functioning college soccer player and electrical engineering student to, when I was dealing with that, I had to sleep 12, 13 hours a night. I could barely exercise. I literally could just get fatigued from walking across campus. And, my whole world got turned upside down. It was the most depressive period of my life, but it was also the inflection period of my life. And it was great because I was in my, ending my second to last year of studies. And, I knew I was getting a degree in electrical engineering, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. And then I just went down the self-healing rabbit hole, realized there's this whole space of alternative health, biohacking, self-learning, other people dealing with similar issues. And I just began to implement a lot of things, lifestyle routines, focusing on sleep, taking some supplements for brain healing and recovering, getting more outside. And I got better. I healed myself to a point where I was able to be a functioning member of society again. And I pretty much just became obsessed. And then I graduated college and had a summer off. So I spent a ton of time outside exploring, as well as just dialing in my recovery. And I kept learning. And then from there, it just kind of proliferated, and I graduated and simultaneously, was getting into Bitcoin and kind of understanding what was wrong with our monetary system. And then I was starting a new job in Silicon Valley in the semiconductor industry. And I was like, yeah, I just graduated, and it's probably helpful to get knowledgeable about health and about wealth, because, it's like the two most important areas of anyone's life. Unfortunately, you do need to know money and have money to function in today's world. And then if you don't have your health, what good is having money? What good is having anything? Because that's, the crux of everything when that goes down the drain. And then COVID happened in 2020, and I was like primed for, understanding what was really going on. It opened my eyes to even more. I dove even deeper down the, monetary system side of things, and then doubled down on the health side, understanding that we really need to have a more decentralized, healthcare system, just understanding of health. And really, we don't know that much about our biology, and that so many things in this modern world are just toxic for us. Our food, the things are, spraying on the food, the air we're breathing, the electromagnetic inputs, plastics. I mean, you could go down the whole list, and I'm sure you and your audience knows them all. And then, yeah, I realized that nobody was kind of talking about this intersection between the money and the food system and also the health system, all being related. So I wrote that book called Bitcoin and Beef. Originally, it was going to call it like Bitcoin and biohacking, but I really hate the word biohacking, to be honest.
Me too.
So the more I learned, I just became really passionate about regenerative agriculture after, starting to buy like quarter half beefs from a friend of my sister's in Wyoming. And, I've always been really obsessed with nature and how things are functioning, and, be the best steward of the environment as possible. And regenerative agriculture just blew my mind that we could actually, because it was the complete opposite of like the anti-meat narrative, which was peaking pretty much like 4 years ago. And I was like, well, this is incredible. Something that's natural and providing us nutrition can also simultaneously fix and restore and repair the environment. So became really focused on that, and was just like all in on Bitcoin, and wrote that book, got on social media, and opened up a lot of doors for me. And then that was kind of my thing for 2021 too, and part of 2023. And then as I was wrapping that up, I realized that I wanted to kind of continue my learning, and, got the baseline down for the food, understanding what's nutrient dense, etc. And throughout this whole time period, I was spending more and more time outside, and I was feeling better. At this point in 2022 and 3, I pretty much surpassed my vitality, how I was feeling from before my brain injury. So I was now better than I was pre-injury. And it was a big part of the reason for that was because how much time I was spending outside. And I knew things like grounding. I knew the circadian rhythm stuff. I bought blue light blockers in 2018. I was blocking blue light, had a grounding mat for years and years, but I didn't really dive super deep into it. And I realized, spending more time on social media, listening to some people talk about this stuff and EMFs and light. And I was kind of like, these people don't really know what they're talking about. Like they're just, average health influencers. Maybe, I don't know what degree or background they came from, but they clearly never took a physics class or had any background. So I was like, wow, I actually had this unique opportunity to, use my degree in electrical engineering to discuss, educate, and learn more about these electromagnetic aspects of our biology. And then I kind of, at that same point, serendipitously, like discovered folks like Dr. Jack Cruz, and who has, been talking about this for a very long time. And I kind of just listened to his one podcast, and I was like, gave me a whole list of researchers and books to go and read. And that's what I've done. And since then, that's kind of been the main focus. And, now I get to apply that to my actual job at Daylight Computer, which is amazing. So yeah, it's been an incredible journey. I'm continuing to learn so much, but I still feel like we're just scratching the surface on what we really know about health, and nature and our own biology.
Yeah. Man, so cool. I would love for you to talk a bit about Bitcoin and beef and kind of how that came to be, and also decentralization in general. And of course, I definitely want you to talk about EMFs and that whole situation as well. But let's start with some of the talk around decentralization. What is that? Why is it important? I think people kind of like throw that word around, especially now,
Mhm.
without a deep understanding of what it represents in the world of finance or food.
Yeah, yeah. It's definitely a buzzword. So is sovereignty, which is another word that I don't think people actually really understand like the true meaning of. But I mean, a system is decentralized when there's no single point of failure or there's no single point of control. So like our monetary system is completely centralized because we have the Federal Reserve, and then we have these big commercial banks controlling everything. So there's all a central point of control and issuance and also failure. And the same thing with our food system. So our food system, using beef or meat, for example, there's four companies that control pretty much 80+% of the meat industry. JBS and Tyson and Cargill and I think National Beef, but it depends on which type of meat. That's highly centralized. That there's such a few amount of companies. Talk about tech, there's the FANG companies or whatever the newest acronym is now. It's like Nvidia. Like these folks are so big. They're the biggest companies in the world, but there's like just a few of them. So this has kind of come to fruition because of the issues with the monetary system and the legislation that has been passed. So when we fully went off of the gold standard in the 70s, that we really just changed the entire dynamic of how money works in our society, how the average person is going to have that value, that purchasing power altered. And subsequently, there's a lot of changes in these various industries. So in the same time period, exporting our agricultural goods internationally proliferated because of this Secretary of Ag, Earl Butz, saying like, go big or go home. Let's like monocrop the crap out of our farming system. And that ultimately like led to a boom and then bust, which consolidated the farming in our country tremendously. And the number of farmers, the percentage of the population farming went down. And then the size of, the upper half of farms skyrocketed. So basically, the small guys went bankrupt and the big guys bought out the small guys. And we just led to this insane consolidation. And then the 90s, they introduced all these subsidies to just proliferate more these kind of monocrop agricultural products. And that's resulted in the food system that we have today and the even more centralized system. So what decentralization is just the antithesis of that. So in regards to the food system, it looks like what it was in like the early 1900s, where there was a ton of local farmers, a good chunk, maybe, I don't know, I don't remember all the stats from my book, but at some point it's like 40-50% of the population is farming. They're raising food
Mhm.
in some capacity, and now it's like 1 or 2% producing food for the other 98%. Barely scraping along, and the average age of a farmer is in their 60s now. So we have all these issues. So decentralized, how does that impact it? And it's going back to what it was also hyper local. The thing that people are now realizing is that food comes from all over the world. There's some ridiculous supply chain and just global economic trade going on, and we sell a ton of our beef in the US to Asia, and then we import a ton of beef from Australia, New Zealand, and South America and Mexico and Canada. And then there's all these labeling issues as well that you don't even really know where it's coming from. And that's a pure waste of energy globally. And it's, a big question mark on the quality. So decentralizing things really is getting to a system that's resilient, it's redundant, and it's hyper localized. And it all kind of goes hand in hand with the money. And when you go to the grocery store, if it's, Walmart and you're buying meat that's coming from who knows where, that money is not staying in your local economy. But if you go to the farmer's market and buy beef from a local producer or some produce from a local producer, you can not only support someone in your local economy, which is going to back pay itself from some other means, maybe it's getting, piled around in improving local infrastructure, education, or other things in your community. But in order for that to happen, it needs to stay in the community. And then you can also verify the quality. So again, the thing we don't know is how high of quality, how free of toxins is our food. Well, really the only way for you to know that, because of the marketing labeling, phenomenons that are going on in the food industry, is to literally have a relationship with the person producing it. And the only way you can do that is going directly to the source and then verifying that yourself. So that's also giving you more autonomy and more sovereignty. So I mentioned that word at the end of the day. And that word really means, like, in its core definition, being the ruler of, something, which in an individual sovereignty perspective means being the ruler of your own life, your own decisions. So much of the, repercussions of this centralized system is that everyone has outsourced the decision making of their own lives, and they've traded convenience for quality. And now we're suffering from that, and we have this, chronic disease crisis, the inflationary environment, the purchasing power of our money is, falling off a cliff. And yeah, that's kind of where we've been trending for decades. And now it's really amazing, because I wrote that book in 2021, and now we have like RFK talking about seed oils in the mainstream, and the issues with our food system, and we have a lot of momentum now. So it's so encouraging to see this. And that is the power of the internet and social media, and that's a topic in and of itself. And what I've been talking about even more lately is our attention. We really live in an attention-based economy, and we're spending all our days staring at screens. So it's encouraging to see that the internet and social media and really COVID had a positive impact. But at the same time, I still think we need to remember that we do live in somewhat of a bubble, and the vast majority are kind of suffering more than ever, and they don't even realize it, because they're just so preoccupied by the attention and the stimulation from their devices.
Yeah, man, it's so much to unpack there, but it brought to mind, I think we started tinkering with or being interested in Bitcoin around the same time. And a few years after that, I started looking as well at silver and gold, not necessarily as investments as much as proxies for what is our currency doing, what is the dollar doing. And so I think it was in 2020, and I was just looking, and silver was something like $14 or $15 an ounce, and gold I think was $1,500 or $1,600, something like that. You look at those numbers now, they have doubled. Basically, like silver's $34 an ounce, not 14. Gold is something like $2,700, $2,800, and it's like gold and silver didn't really change in the past few years, right? Something else is changing, and now it's becoming so obvious to many of us, whether we're buying food or just trying to afford a roof over our head for our families. This is starting to be a problem, not just for the kind of devout weirdos like us, but for our population at large. So some of the solutions looking toward decentralization with nature as a model is so important, because what the kind of world that we're living in right now is so manipulated. All these supply chains and the way that the wrong food is funneled into schools or into our workplaces or into grocery stores. There's a lot that needs to be done to fix these systems, but you could argue that building a parallel system next to it is probably a better solution than trying to fix some of these corrupt behemoths, because that's a fight that I'm not even sure we could take on, right?
Yeah, it's a great point. And a few things to note there is, like, everyone always says that things have gotten so expensive. And in reality, the items have not changed at all. It's just the purchasing power of the dollar. And what's really corrupted our, understanding of value is all of this government intervention, such as subsidies and food
Mhm.
and a global economy, right? Like making things in China and Taiwan and Indonesia for like pennies on the dollar. There should be no world that exists where $1.99 a pound chicken is real. Like that's
Mhm.
not a real price. The
Yeah.
only way you get that is through highly subsidized feed in highly, factory farmed settings for these animals. So when people see like a pastured bird costs like $10, $12 a pound, or a grass-fed beef that costs $10 a pound, they freak out. Oh, it's so expensive. And if you still crunch the numbers, that is so reasonable. And it's really like paying for what matters. What is the true value of what you're paying for and what you're getting out of it? And that's all been so distorted by these big conglomerates and government intervention. And yeah, a cotton t-shirt probably shouldn't cost like $10. Like that's not a real thing.
Yeah.
When we had to use natural materials and make them in our local environment, like it's probably be 3-4x. But yeah, getting back to kind of just these issues at large, it's phenomenal. And being someone who's been in the world of supply chain and both in the semiconductor industry and now with daylight, it's amazing the fragility of these global systems. But you're absolutely right. Like building a life raft and then transforming that life raft into an ark, and then whatever size vessel you want to talk, is really the best way to do it. Because who knows, I'm not here saying that like this is going to be the mainstream, everyone's just going to switch over. Like these companies are literally the biggest companies in the world, and they're propping up the entire fiat economy as a result of their economic activity. So when that continues to erode, it isn't going to be pretty, and we do need to build this like alternative path for the people who see that and are awakened to doing something about it and want to join and want to support that. But the most important thing that I've realized, and everything I've worked on personally and now with daylight, is if there is no alternative, then there's going to be nothing for people to switch to, and that barrier to entry needs to continuously be brought lower and lower. And the more alternatives there are, the more freedom is open for people to choose the path. And it's been amazing in the past 5 years to just see how many better, healthier, more sovereign products alternatives have come to fruition and come to market. And it's only accelerating. So I think that's been the most exciting part of this, is seeing how much everyone is building in this realm and the support that is slowly transitioning over to it.
Yeah, I agree. It is a very exciting time in that regard. Many thanks to people like you who are driving a lot of these fields forward. To go back a little bit earlier about healing your brain, what do you think really made the biggest difference as you went from a place of really not feeling like who you naturally are? Like your personality starts to go away with a brain injury, which I've also experienced and largely recovered from. What was that recovery like for you, and what do you think really worked the best?
Yeah, my recovery was interesting because again, I did everything wrong in that like 1 month after concussion brain injury. I was drinking, I went skiing, I was exercising, like I just never did anything right. So I was basically setting myself up for failure, and then months went by. So I was in a predicament where, I started implementing lifestyle changes. Like first off, let me tell you that your mindset, and with everything in life, is the number one thing that you need to correct to heal. And if you don't believe that you can get better, you're never going to get better. So for me, the first thing I did was I was spending a summer in Portland, Oregon, where I was kind of reinvigorated with my love for the outdoors and nature. I grew up, my mom's from Austria, we were hiking, camping all the time, skiing. But then I fell away from that in high school and college, like any teenager does when you stop hanging out with your family. And I had that summer in Oregon where I was dealing with all these symptoms, and I realized that when I spent time in nature, no service, was camping, oh, I could actually go on a hike and not feel horrible the next 3 days. Whereas when I was going to the office for my internship, I would come back at the end of the day and just like I was done. I was empty. My battery was not functioning anymore to power my human body. And I started meditating, and then going out in nature more just gave me this mindset that, oh, like I'm starting to feel a tiny bit better. Like, what if I can get 10% better, 20% better from where I'm at now? I'll never get back to where I was pre-injury, but that would be really nice. I feel like I could do a lot more and my life would be a lot better. And then that's like, you're locked in. That seems reasonable. And then you get there and you're like, wow, look what I just accomplished. If I can get 10% better, I can get 30, 40, 50. Like, I can just keep going. So really that mindset shift when I was spending more time in nature was the most monumental thing. And then I realized, probably a combination of just being so stubborn and, the motivation from being outside a little more. I was like, just not, I was like, I'm 22 years old. There's no way this is my life to be so limited. And that's why I'm so big on sovereignty now, because I just had it taken away from me. I never want to be out of the driver's seat of my own life again. I never want to be so limited again. And just started learning, and I was like, oh wow, look at all this information available to me. These people had it way worse. This person was paralyzed, and now they're walking, and this person couldn't do anything motor function wise for years, and they've healed this. So that belief system and that self fulfilling prophecy really is important. But I'm a science data nerd as well, so I just started trying things, and I tried a lot of things that really helped me in the beginning were like high potency fish oil and CBD to calm like the inflammation. Now I know how important DHA is for brain health from like an electromagnetic perspective. Just dialing in sleep, blocking blue light, managing stress, getting up in the first thing in the morning. That was tremendously helpful. I was actually a participant of like this clinical trial for a neurostimulation device where it would have like microcurrents of electrical stimulation on my tongue while I was doing rehab, like vestibular therapy, meditation, and gait therapy, which again testifies to some like electromagnetic input having a positive effect. And that really pushed me over the edge of like being able to get back into exercise. And then from there, it was just like fine tuning lifestyle habits. And I went keto, strict keto for like 4 months. That was super helpful to just, have a very strong baseline of blood sugar and not fluctuating a lot, and, anti-inflammatory clean diet. And yeah, just every year that passed, more time outside, more time in the sun, more time grounded. When it was COVID happened, I never worked in an office after that. And, I've woken up and watched the sunrise every day since then. And, I've tried some other supplements and things, but I used to take a lot of supplements in 2019, 2020. I pretty much take nothing on a daily basis now. If I'm traveling or if I'm like, doing a ton of work and don't sleep as much for recovery, maybe. But again, goes back to the more time I've spent outdoors, connected to my local environment, both from a light perspective, pure nature perspective, and then dialing in local seasonal diet, which I think is very underrated. And last winter, I probably embraced seasonality from a lifestyle perspective more than anyone I've ever met. And that helped. Like, I just felt amazing. It was, 5 degrees in Wyoming. My house is 48 degrees. I'm full carnivore keto at this point, and I felt so vital and was thriving. So it's all, to me, just about getting back, using kind of supplements and using some interventions to get to a point where, okay, I've calmed this storm down. Now the lifestyle habit changes and connecting to the local environment and nature as much as you possibly can is going to be what moves the needle the most. But again, I understand that you need to use some interventions and supplements to get to a point where, you're able to get back to some like daily baseline that's high enough to, do your job or, take care of your family, et cetera, et cetera.
So was your gait disturbed as well?
No, it's mostly vestibular and ocular
Okay.
that I had issues with. And I still think ocular have some issues because I've noticed, and again, serendipitous with daylight, the number one thing that would activate my symptoms again would be staring at my phone for an extended period of time.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what it was, and now I really think it's the size of the screen and then the flicker of the LEDs. And flicker on your phone is far worse than on a laptop monitor or a TV or anything. And then of course the smaller size is just like terrible for your eye health, your retina, and that's why myopia rates are just astronomically high compared to 20 years ago.
So what's the problem with flicker for people who aren't aware?
Yeah, so most people don't know that every LED, unless it's some custom circuit, is flickering. It's flickering because the standard electronic control method for LEDs is called pulsed width modulation. And it's just, an advantage from an electronics control perspective for signal modulation. But it's basically changing an amplitude or brightness or flickering at a rate that you can't visually perceive, but your brain can tell that it's happening. So like your iPhone, the last time I measured mine was like 480 or 500 hertz. It could be 120 hertz. It could be, a kilohertz, which it's just that's the number of changes per second. So like 500 hertz means that's like changing an amplitude like 500 times per second. And above 60 to 90 times per second, you can't visually see that anymore. But it's a real stressor for your brain to basically compensate for that. And then it's also straining your eyes. And this is really undebatable. You can even look up like IEEE 1789, which is the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers, will just straight up tell you the side effects of LED flicker are eye strain, migraines, headaches, aggravating autism symptoms, potential, causing epileptic episodes, and also inducing anxiety and potentially panic attacks. And this is known. This is not like debated at all. But for some reason, every single LED in the world pretty much flickers. Fluorescent lights also flicker in some degree. And you think about that being a very unnatural phenomenon because sunlight is continuous. A candle or a fire, we're talking about the only sources of light in our natural world. And fire and candlelight flickers at maybe like the tiniest, the lowest frequency where it's absolutely no big deal. And that's the reality of the world we live in. And that's something that people don't know about. But what do they know? They know when they stare at a screen all day, their eyes hurt, their head hurts, they just feel drained. And that's a big reason for that.
When you take a step back, it's kind of insane that that's what we're all doing, like all day. Or if you just want to hop into the grocery store, it's also going to happen to you. No matter how clean you are with the rest of your life, like this is just kind of built in. Okay. One of the ways that I think about it is if you go for a walk in the woods and you hear the birds singing, our nervous system kind of relaxes into that. When you're staring into a screen, even if you don't perceive that flicker, it's doing the exact opposite. The level of stress that you're experiencing isn't something that you're usually cognizant of, but you might feel totally burnt out and empty by the end of the day.
Exactly. Your nervous system is just always on edge. And this is like one thing, right? So imagine you have like someone just like tapping your shoulder really fast and then add in radio frequencies, which are pinging, cell towers, Wi-Fi networks, like 8 to 14, every 8 to 14 seconds. So then like every 10 seconds, someone else is tapping your shoulder a bit harder. And then you add in all the other crap that is just detrimental input to our biology. Of course, your nervous system is going to be completely dysfunctional. You're always going to be in this fight or flight, sympathetic dominant state. And, as a result of that, we have all these chronic fatigue. We have these oxidative stress issues. Your body's always just like fighting something and it never has a chance to, like you're saying, you go out in nature and what do you hear? Nothing, or very just like natural sounds that are healing to the body, or just not activating something in a negative way. And I think in this modern world we really take that for granted, is just like silence, because we're just being bombarded with these unnatural input signals from every direction. And it's the one thing I appreciate so much about like going hunting or going out into the mountains, because I could just sit there And for the only time in my week, and even living in a small town in Wyoming, there's noise, there's, EMFs, there's screens I'm looking at right now. It's better than a city, but only when I really go out into nature, it's just the signal to noise ratio is actually restored. And that's an engineering term, but it's pretty, self-explanatory, is that the noise we get from our environment is really diluting the correct signals that we're supposed to be receiving from our environment, from nature, from the good things that we're putting into our body. And that's just the only way I can explain it. And the more you reduce that noise on the line, the better your body is going to function and your health will be, because we're having a conversation right now. It's very clear. I can understand you, and there's no disruptive, inputs that would make me kind of misinterpret what you're saying or what you're asking. But if we were in a room, or say there's like 30 more people on this call, it would be really hard to communicate and understand what's going on. And that's the environment we live in. We live in a room of just noise, and that conversation that our body needs to have, that communication that our body needs to have, is just not happening. And that leads to chaos, and biological chaos is inflammation. So that's where we're at.
So let's talk a little bit more deeply about EMFs. How should people understand what's going on a little bit differently than they might now, based upon the conversations on social media, or kind of like the superficial conversations that are out there?
Yeah, and it's hard for a starting point in this conversation, because you always just get some naysayers saying, the sun is higher EMFs than anything else from our technology, or non-ionizing radiation is not harmful. And that's true. But again, you need to have this understanding that like energy, power, frequency, wavelength, these are all like different variables. And yeah, the sunlight has higher energy photons than anything from our technology, anything from radio frequencies, anything from power frequencies. That doesn't mean that it can't have an effect on our biology. And I can point people to plenty of studies. And if you want to look up the best one, Dr. Henry Lai from the University of Washington put together this collection, and he still updates this Google Drive, has over 2,500 studies just coming from like the late 90s to today. If you want to go back to the days of Robert O. Becker, Andrew Marino, and kind of the Cold War, there's hundreds and hundreds more. Alan Frey studying, permeability of the blood-brain barrier because of EMFs. That's like not even included here. And those studies say, in his collection, like 80 to 90% of these studies are showing harmful biological effects. We're talking about radio frequencies, we're talking about power frequencies, 60 hertz coming out of the outlet, 50 hertz for international folks. And a lot of them are just leading to oxidative stress, or neuropsychiatric issues, or fertility, reproductive issues, cardiovascular issues. And you see this trend. It's like, the most energetically important areas, the most electromagnetic areas of our body are being the ones affected. And that's not a coincidence. So you can point there. Or I can tell you maybe that there's manufacturing warning labels on our technology. Apple tells you to never hold your phone on your body. Never have it zero distance from your body. It says that in a warning label. And they don't promote that, of course. And nobody ever talks about that. But when the manufacturer has a warning label, then that's maybe a cause for concern. And if the energy of the photon was really the only thing that matters, how come when you go to a cell tower, they have all these warning signs outside? If you've ever been very close to a cell tower, it says like warning, like high levels of radiation, like, this can be dangerous, authorized personnel only. It's the same thing there. Well, that's because the power of the cell tower is extremely high. The power density of those electromagnetic waves are extremely high. The energy of the photon is the same as, your cell signal coming from your phone pinging that, because it's the same frequency. But power does matter, and distance does matter. Both those two examples tell you that the distance to your technology matters tremendously. And that's because of inverse square law, meaning that if you put 1x of distance away from the source of the EMF, you're squaring the magnitude of the reduction of the field. So that's why you should never hold them on your body. Use speakerphone, step away, don't sleep or work next to a Wi-Fi router. That is like kind of the 80-20 approach to this being not a being able to move the needle a lot with little to no effort. But really, I like to convince people innately that our body is electromagnetic at the lowest level. And why do we know that? Why is that undebatable? It's because let's look at the things that we use to measure the activity of our vital organs, the heart, electrocardiogram, the brain, electroencephalogram, EEG. If you get a tumor or a orthopedic injury, magnetic resonance imaging machine, which basically puts your body in a very strong static magnetic field, pings it with a radio frequency after those hydrogen ions are aligned, and then receives an image back. So this is all rooted in electromagnetism. So it might be true that the entire electromagnetic spectrum, which is vast, we're talking everything from that power coming at your outlet to X-rays and gamma rays and light in between that. All of that would be affecting our biology in some regard. And thinking, what is the electromagnetic spectrum that we are designed to take as an input signal? Again, talking a lot about inputs here, right? And it's simple. As an engineer, if you want to align the outputs of a system, which the outputs of our system is energy, vitality, having that ability, that drive, the relationships, everything. The inputs need to be aligned. And the inputs we're designed to take is the solar spectrum without filtration or dilution or alteration, which is everything from ultraviolet light to infrared and far infrared. Anything that makes it to the surface of the earth from the sun is a natural electromagnetic input. Once we start putting ourselves behind glass, once we start filtering it, putting sunglasses in between, we're altering it, and that's becoming a non-native, solar spectrum input. And then we have absolutely nothing in the radio frequency range, pretty much. There's a very, very, very tiny amount of radio frequencies that makes it to the surface of the Earth from space. And I think one researcher said if you put one cell phone on the moon and it was pulsing, it would exceed that. So pretty much nothing in terms of radio frequencies. And then we have the Earth's natural geomagnetic and electric fields, which are either static, meaning they're DC, they have no oscillation, no frequency associated with them, or they're very low frequency and their resonances are very low frequency, such as the Schumann's resonance, which a lot of people have heard about. And coincidentally, the Schumann's resonance first harmonic is in the same range as our alpha brain waves at like 7.8 to 8 hertz. And higher harmonics are in line with other states of our brain waves. And again, it's because a lot of our biology is operating in this low frequency range. So there's some cause for concern there. And anyone who knows anything about electrical engineering or signals or audio engineering knows that electromagnetic interference is a real thing. When you have two signals with similar frequency ranges, they can interfere with each other and they can create constructive interference, which means it'll amplify the signal if it's in phase, or deconstructive, which means it could potentially cancel each other out. So if our biology is operating, our brain waves are in this low frequency range of tens of hertz, and then we have electrical power at 60 hertz and 50 hertz internationally, we're getting in a range where electromagnetic interference is a real issue. So you don't need any sort of high energy photon to disrupt. And that's what I think is really going on. And there's multiple levels here and how it's affecting our biology. And there's so many studies showing like sometimes a weaker intensity field is actually causing a higher biological effect. And that might be the case, especially when it comes to magnetic fields, because the Earth's magnetic field, which is, again, static DC, is very weak. And, the DC magnetic field we're getting from just using our phone is higher than that. And there's a reason why, if you have a pacemaker or some really, artificial input from a medical device perspective, they tell you never hold technology 6 inches or closer to your body. So there's so many items and areas of this electromagnetic spectrum to unpack, and there's ways it affects our biology differently. But at a high level, that's how I lay it out. We are electromagnetic. You can see that by the devices we're using to scan the health and the action and the function of our biology. There's warning labels. There's clear negligence in like FCC guidelines that haven't been updated since 1996, and people like RFK Jr. have sued them and won in 2021, 2022. Manufacturing warning labels. This body of research that is showing very weak, intense fields can impact our biology. And then it's like, why would you not want to exceed caution for something? When, again, logically, it makes sense. When I go to the mountains of Wyoming, I take out my RF meter and the reading is 0. There's nothing. There's nothing there. And then you take a reading in your house or in a city and it's just off the charts. So just start thinking critically about maybe what is supposed to be in our environment, what is not, and then the evidence that's supporting it. Because guess what? It is really inconvenient that our technology is bad for us. It's really inconvenient. We're using technology right now. It's, put us to a level of, human activity and accomplishment that we could have never achieved without it. But now we need to start rolling it back and saying like, okay, how do we make this better? And how do we remove these artificial inputs that are potentially damaging? And the thing is, we know so little about, what frequency may be less worse for us or maybe neutral. And I can tell you right now, it's very context dependent and very complex.
Yeah.
And anyone who's selling you any EMF product is taking a best stab at it. At best. So I'm very skeptical of anything there, but I'm encouraged that if we, again, acknowledge there's a potential issue, dive into the research, build and engineer solutions around that, we can make tremendous amount of improvement in this being less invasive and less detrimental to our biology and our overall health. So long-winded answer there, but it's a lot. It's complex and it's important to lay out the nuance.
Of course. Brilliant answer, in my humble opinion. But so where does that leave us though? Like, is there a 80-20 that people could kind of practice for their home environment or how they use phones and technology that will allow them to get rid of the most damaging stuff that we know is bad for us?
Absolutely. And that's the best part about this is actually you could probably reduce or mitigate like 95+ % of your exposure by just how you interact with technology and doing some very simple things. So again, going back to the principles I mentioned earlier, some of them, distance is your best friend. So never carry your phone on your body, especially on. Like put it on airplane mode. You could buy a Faraday pouch, but that's kind of a barrier to entry. Just only carry it on your body or hold it in your hand if it's on airplane mode. And then if you do need to use it, again, if you're at your home, you have Wi-Fi on, put it on airplane mode, only use the Wi-Fi. If you have the Wi-Fi and the cellular data on, you're pinging 2 separate networks at the same time. And now everybody can just use Wi-Fi for texting and calling. So there's really no need. Like my phone's on airplane mode pretty much all the time. And then when I need to use it, I flick on Wi-Fi. That keeps Bluetooth off. It keeps the cellular signal and data off. That way I'm only pinging one network. I'm only getting one RF exposure. And then I turn it off when I don't need it. Distance, yeah, for phone calls, like using headphones is really important. Using speakerphones and the way you interact with all technologies. Don't have your laptop on your lap. Maybe that is why Steve Jobs got prostate cancer. I don't know, but there's inherently a big distance component that's really important, and that's, I think, doable for anyone if they're aware of it. And then the other thing is duration. So a lot of these research studies that are showing harmful biological effects are scary. But the good news is a lot of them are showing it just after a chronic level of exposure in terms of duration. So there's no break, 24 plus, 36, 48, 72 hours of just constant irradiation to some degree. And the good part is our body is very resilient, especially when we sleep properly, because we're able to go through cellular repair, autophagy, apoptosis, and melatonin is like the master antioxidant and composing our mitochondrial function. So if we get good sleep, we can really deal with a lot of toxins. The problem is the amount of toxins we're exposed to now is exceeding this threshold, and the quality of sleep is going down because the blue light in the environment right before bed or even during sleep passively, and then the EMFs that we're exposed to or just having on residually in our environment. So prioritize a sleep sanctuary. Get your phone out of the bedroom or turn it off, turn on airplane mode, unplug any appliances you don't need on in the bedroom. I don't even have power in my bedroom. I shut the circuit breaker off. That might be a little high barrier attention for some people, but again, I'm just there to sleep, and then I wake up and get out of my bedroom. I don't hang out in my room. And when you have two-pronged appliances like a lamp or a TV plugged into the outlet, it's ungrounded, you're emitting an electric field like 6 to 8 feet outward for no reason. You're sleeping. You don't need that stuff. You're not using it. Same thing goes for Wi-Fi. That's become pretty popular to turn your Wi-Fi off at night. And it's great. Why? Because who needs Wi-Fi on when you're sleeping? Mm-hmm. You're not working. You're not doing anything. You don't need to be reachable 24/7, 365. You can buy a $10 timer at Home Depot and set it on a schedule. So maybe you have roommates, maybe, it's annoying, but even 4 hours of a break could be a tremendous improvement. And if you live in an apartment complex and you have 42 Wi-Fi networks, near you, it's not ideal, but the one closest to you, which is going to be your own router, makes the biggest impact because of distance, because of inverse square law. So just using technology a bit smarter, and then just, laying common sense out. The more devices that are around, the more signals are going to be pulsing the network, the higher the RF exposure. The more population density, the more people you're around, the more devices there are. And if you max and take advantage of your weekends, be a weekend warrior, go somewhere healing, go somewhere where that signal to noise ratio is far higher, out in nature, go camping, just leave the noise and leave the EMFs behind. And from a circadian rhythm perspective as well, maybe you don't have the ideal light environment, but there's camping studies from CU Boulder saying just 2 days of camping pretty much like resets your circadian rhythm. You're getting so much of that light exposure on the weekend, and that can carry you through the week if you have like a standard 9 to 5. So I think doing the best with what you can. And again, everything I just told you costs $0. Maybe an outlet timer costs like $10, $15. Like there's nothing to sell here. It's a less is more approach. If you think adding things is going to be the defense, you're not wise in that assessment, in my opinion. You're wise if you realize the more things you can remove, the better your body will be at interpreting what it needs and then optimally functioning and healing on its own.
So cool. Fantastic answer, Tristan. Thank you. We only have a couple minutes left, but I want to make sure that we talk as well about the daylight tablet. When you came through Austin with the daylight folks, I was really fortunate that you hooked me up with an early version of this tablet. So I've been using it for a few months now. And I can say I use it primarily for reading, a little bit of writing, and then performance of music. So basically putting my sheet music on there or using an app to display music, whether it's other folk songs for bands that I'm playing with or some of my own. And that is a fundamental difference. One of the things that happened in the world of music in the age of the iPad is we went from sheet music, sometimes with old school kind of incandescent or even red lights. If you were down in the pit playing as a musician, a lot of times it wouldn't be the LED lights, at least in the past. So we went from that, at least when I was growing up and playing music that way, to iPads, just staring into it. dark, so the brightness is like
Mhm.
often turned up. You feel the flicker intensely, and you're supposed to be playing like a laid back, relaxing song or something like that. So it's this internal struggle that I've had working with technology, which, you mentioned the promise of that, but also it comes with a physiological cost. And so transitioning from using an iPad or a traditional tablet to the Daylight tablet in the past few months has fundamentally changed the way that I play music, in the sense that if I'm sitting down and playing piano, I can look at this tablet and I can tell that it's not directly damaging my eyes, my nervous system, or the rest of me. And that means that you can play better music. Your performance can improve. You don't get burned out as quickly. When I first started using it, I was playing generally for an hour or two. And after a couple of weeks of just using this tablet to play, I could play for 3 or 4 hours without really getting fatigued. So I thought that that was really interesting. And there's a lot of promise for using technologies like these. But maybe you could just step up on your soapbox for a moment and talk about how these devices are fundamentally different than the ones that most people are used to, whether it's tablets, phones, or computers.
Absolutely. And I'm so excited to hear you say that. Honestly, might like clip that up and use that as like a
For sure.
testimonial,
Yeah,
because
I love
it's amazing to see where this is coming from, like the music industry. It's not like a key target audience or market for us, but it's everyone that's suffering from these screens, from the detriments of modern technology in different ways, in different environments. So I'm so happy to hear that. Definitely need to chat more. But what we think about at Daylight is again, I just talked on this podcast about why technology is bad for us. So we talk about the flicker, we talked about the EMFs. We didn't dive deep, but blue light. The screens are very high in blue light, and they're completely deficient in infrared light and very low in red. And that is artificial because the solar spectrum is balanced. You never get blue light without red and infrared and the rest of the visible spectrum. You never get violet. You never get ultraviolet without the rest of the spectrum. And that's where all these research articles studying ultraviolet, causing skin cancer, et cetera, they're all done in artificial environments, in isolation. So when you're exposed to light, you want a broad source. You want the whole spectrum. You want all of the frequencies, all of the wavelengths, because they all hit different functions in our biology, and they all balance each other out in some capacity. And the lower energy ones are more healing, they're more restorative, they penetrate deeper, and the higher energy wavelengths are more stimulating, and they don't penetrate as deep, and they can cause oxidative stress. But sometimes that's important to have reactive oxygen species signaling for a certain degree, and that's why just taking antioxidant supplements doesn't work. That's another story. But what we did at Daylight is, how do we address this? How do we fix this problem? And it looks like the biggest, issue with most devices is the screen, and that's the main interface with technology, and that's what we're glued to all day long. So at Daylight, we invented a new display technology. So founder Anjan, who you had on, explained this, I think, in depth, and he worked 6 years on it. And the reason was because he felt like a Kindle was non-invasive to his attention, to his thoughts, to his biology. And that's because a Kindle uses a reflective screen that's monochrome in color. It's grayscale. And the reflective screen has a lot of benefits. And the number one reason why I think the Daylight computer is the healthiest device that you could buy is because it lets you go outside. It lets you tap into the real input signals that our biology needs to thrive, whereas modern technology is not designed to function outside in what I like to call the real world. And we spend, the average person now, like 90-ish% of their time is indoors. And most of that is why? Because we talked about, we don't farm anymore. We work on computers.
Mm-hmm.
That keeps us inside. And if you bring your laptop outside, it overheats quickly. You can't see the screen because it's an emissive screen and it's competing with the sun in terms of brightness. So when you go from inside to outside, everyone like opens their eyes like, wow, it's so bright outside. Yeah, it's actually on average 1,000 to 10,000 times brighter outside. It doesn't perceive that way in terms of how drastic that difference is, but that is why you can't see your laptop outside, and it's why it's so like abrupt when you do that. And that's important because brightness is really just a measure of like photon density, and photon density is really energy. So we're leaving like 1,000-fold of energy on the table from this electromagnetic side of things, just on the table by being indoors all day. So we can bring that back. You can be grounded. You can be in a park. I mean, pretty much, if it wasn't super windy, I was debating on doing this podcast outside in my park. I'm going to go there right after because we can work outside. You know, obviously rain and snow and cold, etc. It makes it a little challenging. But if you can take advantage of the nice days outside, that is huge. You know, circadian rhythm is dependent on both light at night and then light during the day. So we address both because you can do your work outside on the daylight computer with the reflective screen technology we have that, again, it's similar to a Kindle, but it's now fast enough. The refresh rate is fast enough to where you can use it for downloading any Android app on the Google Play Store. You can web browse, you can go on social media even, but you don't have those bright stimulating colors that is going to suck you in. So imagine if a Las Vegas casino, instead of being a dungeon pit with all these bright flashing lights, no sunlight, and the games, you kept the games, but all the colors were grayscale, and they just had these giant open windows letting in sunlight, or maybe it was even outside. What would happen? Nobody would be gambling. They would not make a lot of money because people would have the right input signals to not be sucked in, and they wouldn't have these desensitized dopamine receptors to being so compelled to keep pulling the slots. So that's what we've done. And then at nighttime, as I mentioned, the other kind of key core component to the circadian input is, you know, we're staring at this heavy blue lit screen that's also flickering at nighttime. Right before bed, when in nature, when the sun goes down, you know, the lux of like a full moon is less than 1, and 1 lux is like a 1-foot candle. So that's brightness, a measure of brightness of like a 1 candle, and your screen's hundreds of times higher than that. And then blue light, it's rich in, and that just so happens to disrupt melatonin like 3 to 4 times more than red light. But any light at night is artificial. So our backlight is nice because it's flicker free, because we got rid of the pulse width modulation control, dimming and signaling. And then it's also amber in tone, which is 100% blue light free, but it has a more broad spectrum. So anyone who's a blue light free fanatic, has blue light blockers or iris or f-lux, they know if you go full red mode, which is the only way really to get rid of all the blue light, you literally can't see your screen. It's a terrible visual experience. And if you're wearing red blue light blockers, it's debatably dangerous to just walk around even, especially if you have all the other lights off in your house. So our spectrum, again, it's more broad. There's no light in nature that's just red, like doesn't exist. Candles and fire, they have a broader spectrum where they have, maybe even a tiny bit of blue, but more green, more yellow, more orange, more red, and then most infrared. Whereas our backlight, we have a little bit of green, a little more yellow, more orange and amber, and then some red. And that allows for us to visually see it better. It allows that power density to be spread across more wavelengths. And that's because our photoreceptors are more sensitive to like green and yellow versus just red. So we're trending towards similar to a candle. And in future generations, we hope to incorporate actually some infrared light to make that even closer to a candle. And then on the EMF side of things, we have this blank slate. It's like, yes, we acknowledge this is a problem. In the future, how do we attack this problem? The first version, nothing's been done on the hardware. But even on the hardware is not the only place you can have an advantage or mitigating EMFs. You can actually implement software changes where, say, okay, I have my daily computer next to me right now. I'm not using it. It's going to automatically go into airplane mode in standby. Or you're just taking notes, or you downloaded your song for your band, your music performance, and it's just a PDF. Do you need to be connected to the internet? Probably not. Yeah. So it'll just automatically go into airplane mode, and you won't have to manually be doing that. So there's a lot we can do there, but it starts with attacking the reasons why technology is detrimental to us and really just allowing us to knock those down one by one. It starts mainly with the screen technology, but there's so much more. And yeah, we're just getting started. So it's really exciting. And we just have this opportunity to have devices that restore their use as simply a tool that brings out the best in humanity, that augments our output as a species and removes the detriments and addiction and stimulation.
Nice. I know we both have to run in a minute. I would love to keep talking to you. We'll have to have you back on, Tristan. But in the meantime, what is the best place for people to find your work as well as Daylight?
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on, Abel. It's been a pleasure. And yeah, there's not a ton of folks who are so well-rounded, but there's more and more. And this is what's really exciting to me, because I think the decentralized lifestyle, the sovereignty, this spans all areas of our lives. And it's so fun for me to connect the dots. And I think Daylight is kind of like an intersection of a lot of these. And we have plans, one of the other detriments of technology is the privacy and aspect of this. And, that's something we value heavily also. And we want to build into our core software operating system that we're working on. So you can check out Daylight Computer at our website, daylightcomputer.com. We're going to be probably back on sale when this comes out, I think, based on the timelines you said. And we're at Daylight Co on Twitter and Instagram. So follow us there for updates. My personal Instagram is at Tristan_health. And then on Twitter, I am at Bitcoin and _beef. So yeah, appreciate you having me on, man. It's been a blast.
Right on. Tristan, thank you so much for all the work you're doing in the world.
Appreciate you as well. Education platform like this is the reason why we can spread the word. So equally as important.
Hey, Abel here one more time. And if you believe in our mission to create a world where health is the norm, not sickness, here are a few things you can do to help keep this show coming your way. Click like, subscribe, and leave a quick review wherever you listen to or watch your podcasts. You can also subscribe to my new Substack channel for an ad-free version of this show in video and audio. That's at abeljames.substack.com. You can also find me on Twitter or X, YouTube, as well as Fountain FM, where you can leave a little crypto in the tip jar. And if you can think of someone you care about who might learn from or enjoy this show, please take a quick moment to share it with them. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.